You know, when you close your eyes and picture a caveman, there's a very specific, almost universally agreed upon image that pops into your head.
Oh, absolutely. The classic museum diorama.
Right. You have this heavily browed, shivering guy wrapped in some ragged pelt, clutching a crude club, just staring out at a frozen wasteland. He basically looks like he is one missed meal away from total extinction.
Yeah, the popular myth is that early human life was nothing but this brutish, exhausting, and just constantly starving grind.
But when you actually look at the data, that image starts to look way more like a cartoon than reality. So, welcome to today's deep dive, where you, and yes, I mean you listening right now, are joining us as the third mind at the table.
Glad to have you here with us.
We are going to look at how ancient families actually lived, worked, and survived. And we're doing this by comparing two massive technological epochs. We've got the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, running from about 2.5 million to 10,000 BCE, and then the Neolithic, which is the new Stone Age that followed right after.
And, the contrast between those two eras is going to upend a lot of modern assumptions about progress. We are drawing on a really compelling stack of sources to do this.
Oh, the sources are amazing today.
They really are. We're looking at comprehensive archaeological reports and bioarchaeological data from prehistoric burial sites like Sungir in Russia. Plus, we have access to something called micromorphological sediment analyses from places like Sibudu Cave in South Africa.
Which sounds incredibly complex. What is that exactly?
Basically, scientists are taking intact blocks of dirt from the cave floor, putting them under microscopes, and reading the microscopic layers of sediment like pages in a diary. It lets us see exactly how these people structured their daily lives.
That is wild.
It is. And by the time we finish unpacking these sources, you might actually find yourself, well, actively envying the daily schedule of an Ice Age hunter-gatherer.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if they weren't fighting off saber-toothed tigers and starving 24/7, what did a typical Tuesday actually look like for a Paleolithic family?
Right, so to understand their Tuesday, you first have to understand the social structure. We are looking at mobile bands, typically comprising about 20 to 60 individuals.
So, pretty small, tight-knit groups.
Exactly. And the labor within these bands was highly egalitarian and sex differentiated. But the most shocking part to modern sensibilities is the workload itself.
Oh, wow.
Economic models derived from foraging band data show that direct food procurement, so hunting and gathering the calories they needed, only took about 3 to 5 hours per adult per day.
Wait, I want to make sure I am hearing that right. 3 to 5 hours a day.
That's right.
That is barely a 20-hour work week just to keep the entire band alive.
Yeah, that is the baseline for survival.
Yeah.
And even when you factor in all the ancillary domestic chores like gathering firewood, collecting water, maintaining tools, and the culinary processing of the food, the absolute maximum labor expenditure capped out at about 40 to 44 hours a week.
Wow.
Anthropologists actually refer to this as the original Affluent Society economic model.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, or at least draw a comparison, because it just feels completely backwards to me.
How so?
Well, we live in an era of unprecedented convenience, right? We have dishwashers, robotic vacuums, gig economy grocery delivery. We even have software that practically does our jobs for us.
Oh, for sure. The modern world is built on automation.
Exactly. We invented all these labor-saving devices to free up our time, and yet modern hustle culture has people grinding away for 50, 60 hours a week just to pay rent. Are we really saying that a literal caveman living without electricity or wheels had more leisure time than a modern knowledge worker?
What's fascinating here is the mechanism behind that free time. The reason the Paleolithic economic model worked so beautifully wasn't because they were lazy, and it wasn't because food was just magically falling into their laps.
Right, they still had to go out and get it.
Exactly. It worked because they operated with extreme efficiency. These early humans possessed an intimate, encyclopedic cognitive map of their local ecology.
Right, they just had the whole landscape memorized.
Much more than memorized. They understood the microscopic seasonal shifts, the animal migration patterns, and the exact plant rooting cycles. They didn't need to work long hours because they weren't, searching aimlessly.
They knew where to go?
They knew exactly where the food was, when it would be at peak nutritional value, and how to extract it with minimal wasted energy.
So how did that efficiency play out on the ground? Like, if they are only spending a few hours on this, what does the actual strategy look like in the morning?
Well, during the mid-morning, the band would typically divide their efforts. Adult females, usually accompanied by juveniles and older band members, would head into the surrounding woodland and grassland ecosystems.
And what were they looking for?
They focused on systematically harvesting highly predictable, high-yield botanicals. We were talking about wild tubers, starchy roots, seeds, nuts, and berries.
So a really solid, reliable caloric base.
Exactly. And they use fire-hardened wooden digging sticks and intricately woven plant baskets to maximize their haul. They also gathered things like birds' eggs, freshwater mollusks, and resinous plant saps.
Resinous plant saps? What was that for?
Oh, that was critical for manufacturing tools later in the day, which we'll get
Oh,
into.
gotcha. So you have this incredibly reliable base of calories and raw materials coming in from the gathering teams. How did the rest of the band contribute to the food supply?
Adult males primarily engaged in tracking large game. Things like hoofed animals, wild boar, and occasionally massive creatures like mammoths.
Just casually hunting a mammoth before lunch?
Right. And the weaponry they used to do this was incredibly advanced. They weren't just running around with heavy, clumsy, thrusting spears like in the movies.
There weren't?
No, not at all. In southern Africa, the archaeological record shows the development of advanced bow and arrow systems as early as 60,000 years ago.
Wait, 60,000 years ago? That is way earlier than I would have thought.
It really is. These weapons allowed for coordinated group drives or solitary ambush hunting from a safe distance.
Yeah.
And a successful hunt provided far more than just protein and fat.
Right. They use the whole animal, I assume?
Exactly. It yielded vital raw materials, long bones for marrow and for knapping into new tools, sinew for creating durable cordage, and heavy hides for clothing and shelter.
Man, I want you, the listener, to just imagine for a second what you would do with your life if your core job, the thing you absolutely had to do to keep yourself and your family alive, only took 4 hours a day, and you were completely done by early afternoon.
It's a pretty appealing thought, isn't it?
It really is. And it completely reframes how we should look at their physical campsites. Because if they had all this excess time and energy, they obviously wouldn't just be huddling in the dirt waiting for the sun to come out.
No, they wouldn't.
Eh.
And that brings us to how they manage their microenvironments. The home was heavily curated.
Curated how?
Well, whether they were utilizing a natural rock shelter, a cave mouth, or a constructed timber and hide dwelling, the internal geography was highly structured around central hearths.
So the fire was basically the living room.
Pretty much. Those fires provided thermal regulation, a cooking area, and predator deterrence. But those microscopic sediment analyses we mentioned earlier, they reveal something much more sophisticated about their sleeping quarters.
Right, the Sibudu Cave findings. This is the part that dates back 77,000 years, right?
Exactly, 77,000 years.
The botanical engineering at Sibudu Cave is just incredible to me. They weren't just sweeping an area clear and sleeping on the hard rock.
Far from it.
They actively harvested specific river grasses and sedges to construct these massive multi-layered bedding mats. But it is the specific top layer of those beds that is so ingenious.
Yeah, they intentionally topped these grass beds with the leaves of a plant called Cryptocarya woody, which is also known as the Cape laurel.
And the sources point out that the Cape laurel contains natural larvicidal and insecticidal chemical compounds. So they're essentially weaving chemical repellents into their mattresses. They created a literal barrier against malaria-bearing mosquitoes, parasitic lice, and biting flies.
It is a deliberate manipulation of local botany to engineer a healthier living space. And remember, these were communal sleeping surfaces, often covering 2 to 3 square meters, designed for multiple adults and children.
That's a huge bed.
It is. And the space was multifunctional, too. The beds they slept on at night served as clean, insulated workspaces during the afternoon. They'd sit there fabricating tools or processing hides.
But logically, if you have a whole family sleeping, eating, and doing manual labor on a grass mat, it's going to break down eventually.
Inevitably.
It's going to get contaminated with organic waste and just overrun with pests, regardless of the Cape laurel. So how did they deal with the sanitation problem? Because they didn't have garbage trucks.
This is where we see evidence of brilliant structural fire management, starting around 58,000 years ago.
Structural fire management.
Yeah. The microscopic layers of the cave floor show that when the bedding became severely fouled, they didn't just abandon the shelter. And they didn't manually haul the rotting grass out either.
So what did they do?
They systematically burned the bedding right where it lay.
Okay, setting your bed on fire inside your house seems incredibly risky. How does that translate to good sanitation?
Well, it works because of what the fire leaves behind. Burning the bedding eliminated any entrenched flea or parasite populations, and it completely sterilized the cave floor.
Okay, that makes sense. A total reset.
Exactly. But more importantly, it produced a compacted, uniform substrate of charcoal and ash. Ash is highly alkaline and naturally desiccating, meaning it draws out moisture.
Oh, wow. So it keeps the floor dry.
Right, so they would lay down a fresh layer of insecticidal grasses directly over this dry, clean ash base. They were chemically and structurally resetting the living space over and over again.
That mastery of fire, their pyrotechnology, I guess you'd call it, seems to be the foundation for almost everything they did in their free time. The sources talk about them doing thermal pretreatment of stones in the afternoons?
Yes, and that is a perfect example of applied physics.
How so?
If you take a piece of raw silcrete rock and just strike it with another stone, it can shatter unpredictably. It's frustrating to work with.
Right, you'd just get useless chunks.
Exactly. But early humans figured out that if they buried the stone in a controlled ash bed and slowly heated it, the heat would draw out microscopic water molecules trapped inside the stone.
No way. They were basically baking the rocks.
Yes. And baking it altered the crystalline structure, making the rock more homogeneous and glass-like. So when they dug it out and struck it, the stone flaked off into long, razor-sharp blades with incredible precision.
That is and it goes beyond physics into actual chemistry, too. I'm looking at the way they manufactured the glue to attach those sharp blades to the wooden shafts.
The adhesive technology is fascinating.
It really is. They didn't just use tree sap. They were taking plant gums, mixing them with resins, and then adding pulverized red ochre in open flames. Why go through all the trouble of adding crushed red rock to a perfectly sticky tree resin?
Because raw tree resin is brittle once it cools and dries.
Yeah.
If you hit an animal with a spearhead glued only with resin, the sheer impact will shatter the bond and the blade will just snap right off.
Oh, so the weapon would be useless after one throw.
Exactly. By adding pulverized red ochre, they were introducing a chemical filler. The iron oxide in the ochre fundamentally changed the structural properties of the adhesive.
That is wild.
It prevented the glue from shrinking and cracking when it cooled. They were manipulating matter at a molecular level to solve a complex mechanical problem.
It is so far beyond just banging rocks together. It's closer to formulating like an industrial composite material or prehistoric epoxy.
That's a great way to put it.
So we have these highly engineered, chemically synthesized, pest-free homes, and thanks to their efficient hunting and gathering, they have lots of free time. This stability seems to be the launch pad for some deep social investments.
Definitely. The afternoon domestic labor encompassed far more than just tool maintenance. For example, by 61,000 years ago, we see the use of delicate-eyed bone needles.
Oh, like actual sewing needles.
Yes, which
Nice.
allowed families to stitch fitted, multi-layered hide garments, footwear, and headwear.
But the clothing wasn't purely about surviving the cold, though. Here's where it gets really interesting. The bioarchaeological data from the Sungir burials in Russia.
Ah, yes, the Sungir site.
We have skeletons found adorned with somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 mammoth ivory beads sewn directly onto their clothing. And the sources mention that experimental replication shows producing a single mammoth ivory bead with stone tools requires about 1 hour of continuous labor.
It is a staggering commitment of resources. You are looking at thousands of hours of non-survival labor dedicated just to the symbolic adornment of a single person.
Which means it mattered to them immensely.
It tells us that aesthetic expression and social identity were just as vital to their existence as calories. And we see this in their evening activities as well.
Like, what did they do after dinner?
Well, as darkness fell, they practiced egalitarian food sharing. The wild starches and roasted meats were distributed equitably, regardless of who actually hunted or gathered that day.
So nobody went hungry if they had a bad foraging day.
Right. And they spent their evenings storytelling and making music. We actually have 35,000-year-old flutes crafted from vulture radius bones and mammoth ivory recovered from Hohlefels Cave in Germany.
That's beautiful. I can see how music and art build community, but I want to challenge this idea using the bioarchaeological data on healthcare.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are always taught that the Stone Age was a cutthroat survival of the fittest environment, right? Where the weak were simply left behind to die.
That's the persistent myth, yes.
But the sources detail skeletons from the upper Paleolithic of individuals who had severe congenital bowing of the long bones, debilitating spinal deformities, and traumatic wounds.
Yes, there's clear evidence of major physical disabilities.
Right. These were people who physically could not walk long distances, let alone hunt or gather. Yet their bones show they lived into advanced adulthood. Why on earth would a band in a supposedly harsh environment share hard-earned food and physically carry someone who cannot contribute to the caloric bottom line?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it dismantles the purely Darwinian hyper-competitive view of early humans.
So it wasn't just about the strongest surviving.
Not at all. Stone Age families did not operate under ruthless utilitarian constraints. Durable social bonds, emotional solidarity, and ethical commitments to care for the vulnerable were not luxurious byproducts of having free time.
What were they then?
They were the actual survival strategy of the species. A band survived the Ice Age because they possessed the empathy to care for each other and maintain a rich communal life.
Wow. Okay, so we've painted a picture of a life that is leisure-rich, highly social, incredibly inventive, and deeply empathetic.
A pretty good life, all things considered.
Which brings us to a massive contradiction. Why did humanity throw this 20-hour work week away around 10,000 BCE to invent farming?
The Neolithic Revolution. Between 10,000 and 4,500 BCE, humanity began a structural reorganization. We shifted from nomadic hunter-gathering to sedentary food production.
Right, so staying in one place.
Exactly. We built permanent rectilinear mud brick villages, established social hierarchies, and began cultivating monoculture crops like wheat and barley, alongside domesticating animals.
So what does this all mean for the people actually living through it? Because the sources describe this transition as the agricultural health paradox.
It is a profound paradox. Paleolithic hunter-gatherers maintained a highly varied, nutrient-dense diet. The skeletal record confirms they were generally taller, possessed incredibly dense bone structures, and showed very few markers of systemic nutritional stress.
So they were basically athletes.
Yes. But the moment we adopted agriculture and shifted our primary caloric intake to starchy carbohydrates like wheat and barley, human physiological health plummeted.
I mean, the bioarchaeological data on their teeth is terrifying.
They're pretty grim.
These early Neolithic farming communities suffered from endemic cavities, severe periodontal disease, and premature tooth loss. The starch basically just rotted their mouths.
Yes, it did.
And it wasn't just the diet, right? By staying in one place, they completely changed their relationship with disease.
Entirely. Living in a sedentary village brought catastrophic ecological consequences. For the first time in human history, populations were living continuously in one place, which means human waste was accumulating in their immediate environment.
Ugh, yeah, that's a problem they didn't have when they moved around and burned their beds.
Exactly. Furthermore, they were living in intimate proximity with domesticated livestock, cattle, sheep, and pigs.
And how exactly does living near animals trigger the health paradox?
When you live inches away from animal feces and share the same water sources, pathogens that naturally circulate within animal populations have the opportunity to mutate and jump the species barrier into humans.
Oh, wow. So that's the origin of zoonotic infections.
Precisely. The communicable epidemic diseases, the parasites, the plagues that define so much of later human history, these were largely unknown to small, mobile Paleolithic bands.
Okay, I am struggling to understand the logic here.
What's the sticking point?
Well, if everyone in these early farming villages is eating gruel, losing their teeth to decay, suffering from brand new zoonotic plagues, and generally dying younger than their hunter-gatherer ancestors, how did farming win?
It's a great question.
How did a weaker, sicker population take over the entire globe?
This raises an important question, though, about how we define success. The answer lies in a biological demographic trade-off. Despite the heavy disease burden and poorer individual health, Neolithic women experienced significantly shorter birth intervals.
Oh, because the nomadic bands had to carry their children.
Exactly. In a mobile Paleolithic band, a mother physically cannot carry multiple infants and toddlers across vast migrations.
Right, you only have 2 arms.
By necessity, birth spacing had to be longer, often 3 to 4 years apart. But the moment you settle in a permanent mud brick village, that physical constraint vanishes. You don't have to carry your children to the next valley.
So they could have a lot more kids.
So many more. Even though infant mortality was high due to disease, it was offset by massively elevated birth rates.
We basically traded our health for sheer numbers. We willingly gave up a 20-hour work week, strong bones, and a clean environment just to shovel animal waste so we could pump out more babies.
It really highlights the difference between evolutionary success and individual quality of life. Evolutionary success simply measures sheer population numbers and the ability to extract predictable calories from a piece of land.
It doesn't care if you're happy or healthy.
Right. The transition to agriculture was not a conscious choice made for personal happiness or leisure. It was a brutal numbers game. Once one group started farming, their population exploded. They simply outcompeted, displaced, or absorbed the smaller nomadic bands through sheer demographic force.
Wow.
It permanently locked human society into a labor-intensive trajectory that we are, still accelerating on today.
What a journey we've been on in this deep dive. You, the listener, have traveled from the meticulously engineered sedge-lined sleeping mats of a 20-hour-a-week Ice Age hunter to the crowded, starch-eating, cavity-prone villages of the first farmers.
Quite a shift.
It is a stark reminder that what we label as progress in the broad sweep of human history doesn't always translate to a better Tuesday for the individual actually living through it.
I think that leaves us with a fascinating concept to ponder. We look back now, thousands of years later, with the benefit of the archaeological record, and we can clearly see that the agricultural revolution was a massive physiological step backward for individual human health.
Yeah, without a doubt.
It was a trap built out of the desire for convenience and predictable calories. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what modern revolutionary technology are we rapidly adopting right now in the name of progress, efficiency, and convenience that future archaeologists will look back on as the exact same kind of trap?
We might still be shivering in that museum diorama after all, just staring at a different kind of frozen wasteland. Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging.